Welcome to this edition's The Boardroom today with Kangai. This webinar today is about stepping up sustainability in the boardroom to achieve sustainable development outcomes. The Boardroom today is a thought leadership, interactive, engaging, and enriching dialogue platform which discuss current global boardroom issues. Joining me today, I've got two guest speakers. I've got Mr. Rodney Ndamba, the CEO of the Institute of Sustainability Africa, and Mr. Mike Giroux, the chairman of the Institute of Directors. We will have presentations from both guests, and then afterwards, we will take questions from the audience. We think that we will take approximately 40 to 45 minutes to complete this session. Allow me to introduce the profiles of our guests, starting with Mr. Rodney Ndamba, who is the CEO of the Institute of Sustainability Africa. He's a holder of Master of Arts in Accounting and Finance from the University of Huddersfield in UK. Mr. Ndamba has worked for different companies, including the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. He's participated with ACA Global Forum and he's done a lot of research. Currently, he's studying for his doctorate in business administration. Mr. Ndamba has got more than 20 years of experience in both private and academic sector, in both Zimbabwe and the United Kingdom. He has worked in retail, healthcare, construction, not-for-profit, which is the NGO, and is consultant. So Mr. Ndamba today is going to be our first presenter. Let me also introduce Mr. Mike Giroux. Mr. Giroux is an entrepreneur, a strategist, and a leader. He is currently the chairman of the Institute of Directors, as well as the chairman of the Green Buildings Councils of Zimbabwe. He is the past councillor and chairperson of the Committee of Values, the Valuers Council of Zimbabwe, and past vice president of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. He sits on various boards. So these two gentlemen will be presenting to us today. Allow me to give the platform to Mr. Ndamba to start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. I've got limited time, so I'm going to go straight into the presentation so that at least we then have much more time on the question and answer session. The presentation that I'm going to take you through, I may not go through entirely everything, but I might leave some of the details for your reading and also the background to our organization. I'll try and skip that a bit. But in terms of the overview of this presentation, I'm going to cover the context of sustainability within corporate boards. I'll talk about why sustainability for the boards and what are some of the responsibilities that are expected of the boards and some of the strategic actions if we are to achieve sustainable outcomes from corporate boards. So the whole structure of the presentation is that it's designed not in the usual format where we start from the introduction, then we get to the end where we want to go to. I'm going to start from the end first, then come back to where we start off from, then take it there. So I will provide here just a summary of the insights about this presentation. And first starting being to define in terms of what is corporate sustainability or what is sustainability as we understand it. So it is actually the practice of integrating economic, environmental, social governance into operational practices and decision-making of organizations of all types. It's not mainly for the private sector only, but it also covers NGOs, it covers public sector, including government. So, as we speak right now, there's been a movement among some of the emerging economy governments that have also taken this approach of corporate sustainability and embed it into the government systems, and some of it is now being evidenced in what we call green budgets, which now incorporate the environmental aspect. But all this is being done towards contributing to sustainable development. So this is basically the outline of what sustainability is all about. Some may know it as ESG. But with what we want to talk about today, how does sustainability drive SDG outcomes? So what I have here, the pillars of sustainability, there are about 4 pillars, which includes economic, environmental, social, and governance aspects. So from these slides that you are seeing, I have tried to link the sustainability pillars and the outcomes that are expected in the SDGs if you are to apply sustainability as a business strategy or as a corporate strategy. So you'll find that on the 17 SDGs, they are also linked to a sustainability strategy when an organization is actually implementing it. So you look at the economic pillar, it's linked to SDG 8, 9, and 11. Then if the environmental pillars are also linked to SDG 6, 7, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Then the social are linked to SDG 1 up to 4. Then the governance are linked to SDG 5, 10, 16, and 17. So if you are implementing sustainability, these are the expected outcomes from a board perspective that you then link to the SDGs. So just to take it a bit more further in terms of the sustainable development outcomes that are expected of board, if you implement the economic pillars, you've got the SDGs that I've mentioned, but some of the outcomes that are expected, one is your corporate investments towards healthcare, public infrastructure, or inclusion of smallholder suppliers in your supply chain, your good tax behavior in terms of paying your taxes because they contribute to national development, and also empower and investing in innovations or innovative solutions are some of the expected outcomes if you are to implement sustainability towards your SDGs, and this is what is expected of you. Then the environmental indicators, key to it is that you need to minimize negative impacts on the environmental sustainable development goals, then also invest in environmental friendly equipment and systems. On the social indicators, you then need to contribute towards social development and support for education and social well-being of society. Then you look at the governance aspect, what is expected of a board from the outcome side, that they need to create and implement inclusive policies, then implement sustainable development practice, and also make sustainable decisions. So these are the decisions that takes into account the economic, environmental, and social impact. Then lastly, you need to set the targets so that your performance can also be assessed. And where there is need to collectively take action, you also need to be involved. So the value proposition from all this is that if boards could implement corporate sustainability by embedding the economic, environmental, and social issues then in their business operations and decision making, then sustainable outcomes can actually be achieved. And the typical companies that have also realized opportunities out of implementing this in line with the SDGs, for example, Econet, they've got now their solar company, which is now looking at power generation. They've got the inclusive decisions, inclusive financial inclusivity, which is now taking everyone on board. Then you've got companies like Safaricom that have also implemented corporate sustainability, and they've achieved quite a number of business opportunities. You look at also Standard Bank here in Zimbabwe, we know it as Stanbic, but if you look at their operations across South Africa, they are all driven from corporate sustainability and also the SDGs as well. But key to this value proposition is that sustainability leadership is critical for sustainable development, because there is a link between your corporate governance or your board practices or the way your board is set with the sustainable development outcomes. And I'm now going to take you why sometimes some of the companies, this does not really come out. Just to take you to a global context in terms of sustainability and the sustainable development outcomes. This is a research that was done in 2020, which is titled Sustainability Board Report 2020. And the findings of it is that 17% of 100 largest Fortune companies, the board members had knowledge on sustainability. And out of the 100 Fortune companies, 63 had sustainability committees. So these are committees where their main focus is on the sustainability issues or the ESG issues, and members to those committees come from those different categories. They've got an economic background. Some are actually have got a background in environmental science. Some are coming from the social side. Others could be the legal guys who come from the governance side. So knowledge also on sustainability was found to be lacking amongst many boards, and this resulted in inadequate discussion of sustainability risks and opportunities among the boards. But in looking at this, how do they square up? So in Zimbabwe, what we have tended to find is that majority of the companies have got poor sustainability performance. And this is actually found when you find that majority of the board, or it could be 80% of the board, is all made up of accountants. Or some boards, you find that they are predominantly lawyers, and or some they are actually predominantly male. So in that regard, when you then look at the balance of skills, for them to be talking about social, environmental issues, their main focus becomes more on the economic issues, the financial issues, then leave out the rest. And the issues that affect women, because it's a predominantly male board, then the chances of discussing issues that affect, female employees is very less. If looking also at the gender equity index, for example, for our local stock exchange, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, which only has about 3 female, if not 2 to 3 female CEOs out of 60 companies. And that's a very poor performance. A recent research by the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiatives in Africa, it picked South Africa, which had 28% in terms of female board members. As for ourselves, like for Zimbabwe, we couldn't feature in that report because I think our numbers were far much more below. With 3 female CEOs, we could not participate. In terms of the board, they are mostly predominantly male. So the profile also showed that ESG issues, which are the sustainability issues, are actually receiving very little attention. Out of the 60 companies, less than 20 companies actually produce their sustainability reports. And very few, not more than 5 companies have got a standalone sustainability policy. So you can see that whole context. But what are some of the implications of this? Companies are actually operating on shadow competitive advantage. Some investors who, particularly the responsible investors, they would prefer not to invest in such companies. And you look at the board profile, it's quite very, very poor. And that then brings in unsustainable business practices to prevail in many companies. And ultimately, for many, because sustainability is not a strategy, there's no policy, many companies contribute to the SDGs blindly without really linking it up to their business strategy. But why does sustainability matter for the board? The term board itself has got a meaning in terms of the expectation for sustainability. So it is the responsibility of the board to build an authentic purpose narrative for sustainability, such that it becomes part and parcel of what defines their organization. The board also has to own the purpose in terms of practices, which basically means that the sustainability issues, ESG issues, need to be included on the board's agenda. We have seen like local companies on a quarterly basis, some of them are now beginning to include sustainability in their board pack and also include it on their agenda. The A also represents that the board need to assess its commitment at all levels. In most cases, from my experience in Zimbabwe and some of the regional countries, you find that the middle management will be committed. You go to the senior management, some of them may be less committed. You go to the board, you find that potentially they are not committed to something. That's why when it then comes to the SDG outcomes, they tend to be less, or they do it for marketing purposes. So it is also the board's responsibility to ensure that the R&D reinforces the purpose in core board decisions. When the board makes decisions, do they consider the environmental, social, and governance impact of their decisions? So they need to reinforce that in core board decisions. Then lastly, the G is for the board to drive organizational accountability by aligning the ESG metrics or the sustainability metrics to executive compensation. For example, there are some companies that are saying, if you are to receive a bonus at the end of the year, you then need to perform to this level in terms of maybe you are reducing waste that is coming out, you are reducing energy consumption, there's little wastage in terms of materials. If you reach certain thresholds, then you are going to, your bonus is going to be calculated based on that. And that's what has been helping some companies, some boards, drive now sustainability for sustainable development outcomes. But what are some of the board's responsibility over this? I'll talk about the drivers that are there. Part 21 of the new of the statutory instrument 134 of 2019. Part 21, Section 399 actually places a board responsibility over sustainability, and it requires companies to issue, the chairman to actually issue out a statement on how this has actually helped the organization and what the strategies the company has. You go to the legal side, the New Companies and Other Business Entities Act, Section 220 makes reference to the National Code on Corporate Governance, that it must be complied with. But if you then go to the corporate governance, which is the same code, the National Code on Corporate Governance, you go to Section 5 on information disclosure, it requires the board to ensure that they produce a sustainability report, which reports on how the board has performed or how the company has performed in terms of economic, environmental, social, and governance issues. You go to King 4 of South Africa, the King Code. There are also provisions for board responsibility over sustainability so that sustainable development outcomes are actually achieved. But with all this, what actions can be taken so that sustainable development outcomes can be achieved? The board actions that I've managed to pick out here or try to draw your attention include that the board need to include sustainability in the board performance matrix. If you look at the board of Shell, Unilever, Tesco, Standard Bank in South Africa, the board performance is also assessed based on the economic, environmental, social, and governance issues, how the board has performed in managing those. So which then requires that there is need to also include sustainability in the board agenda. On a quarterly basis or on an annual basis, sustainability has to be discussed so that remedial action can be taken, or where performance is lacking, it can actually be enhanced. So boards also need to link executive remuneration to sustainability performance. I know of one local company, I'll not mention them, but their executives, they've also, salaries have also been tied up to them achieving economic performance target, environmental performance target by minimizing the negative impacts, and also the social performance, and also the governance performance. So boards also need to consider investing in their sustainability strategy. So in some companies you find, or organizations, they may accept it or adopt it as a matter of principle, but there are resources that are also required to ensure that it's fully implemented. And another issue for board action is that we have tended to find that local analysts, when it comes to briefings at AGM, they tend to focus more on the financials, then ignore the ESG issues. But this also comes back to the board that when they present their performance, they should not just focus on how much profit they've made, but they must also talk about how much impact they've minimized in terms of the negative impacts and how much positive impact they have caused. They may have made a loss, but have contributed to a lot of significant positive impacts, which relates to SDG outcomes. And that's a good thing to report. Then lastly, it's about improving the sustainability board profile. So the board need to be composed of people of different backgrounds, not just the economic, but those with environmental science, those with a social background, and those with a governance or a legal background, so that you help in terms of board governance. As I come to my conclusion, key takeaway points is that adopting sustainability initiative standards is key for sustainable development outcomes. Due to time, I will not talk much about the GRI standards, but they are the most comprehensive sustainability standards according to a research done by KPMG in 2020. They find them being the most used standards, and these are actually linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have seen in Zimbabwe some companies now taking traction to apply them. South Africa has done quite well on them. Kenya has joined in. Nigeria now has also even some guidance for listed companies to apply these guidelines. Another takeaway point from my end is that sustainability is the greatest economic opportunity for sustainable development of our time, which means from there you can also realize opportunities. There are also risks from the sustainable development goals. And lastly, boards need to establish sustainability committees. What other companies have done is that they've converted their risk committee into sustainability committees. Some now have chief sustainability officers. So if you look at the board of Unilever, this is what anchors them. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, just to part, is that we need to consider the history we are leaving for the next generation as transient caretakers on planet Earth. Because we have to remember that as we sit in the boards, we are not here to live, we have to pass on this generation. And this went for Professor Mervyn King of South Africa, the chair of the King Court Committee. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ndamba. I don't want to dilute your presentation because we are going to be asking questions around the presentation. That was asked by one of our audience that says, are there any resources available in Zimbabwe where directors can use, which directors can use to familiarize themselves with the new duties in terms of companies and other business ethics and acts? And I think to that you have answered it very well. The source is the Institute of Directors. That is where you can find all training, all documentations, including pulling from you the Companies Act, the King's reports, all these other reports that can help you familiarize yourself with what you need to do as a director when you start the office and continuously improving yourself and your understanding. Thank you very much for that. Indeed, we have a duty to build the future of our people, the future of the planet, the future where our companies can operate, not just operate in the short term. At this particular stage, I will start taking questions and also asking questions that I've already promised. For Mr. Ndamba, I've requested that you possibly could want to help us with the terms of reference of sustainability committees so that people can be clear on what is required of them to do as a committee.
Okay, thank you so much. In terms of the terms of reference for the Sustainability Committee, because most risk committees, from my experience, having also observed in a lot of companies in Zimbabwe, because of the predominance of economic board members, like, for example, you've got a board that is 80% or 90% accountants, you'll find that if you go through that board, a lot of their attention is placed on financial risk. But when you then transform that into a sustainability committee, it then requires you to bring in other board members or incorporate members with a different skill than the economic. So you need to then have someone with an environmental science background, someone with a social background. I'll give you, for example, there's one company which has tried to diversify its board. They've got a trade union, someone in the board who actually understand the social issues from the employee issues. So they are able to actually then help in terms of what risk does the company face when it comes to the employees. Or you may want to have someone with a social background who then help the company in terms of how do we manage our stakeholder engagement, our stakeholder relationship, because we also have social risk. Then we have got the governance, someone with the background, it could be from the legal side or it could be from a governance practitioner perspective, who would then be responsible for helping the board in terms of how do we maintain a good gender balance when it comes to the nomination. Then how do we also ensure that issues of equity are also addressed? One of the key things that this committee helps is that there are now a crop of new investors. If you go to Bloomberg, they've got what they call the GEI, which is the Gender Equity Index. And these are investors who say we will not invest in your company as long as we are predominantly male, or if you fall short in your board in terms of having more female in there and your policies are falls short in terms of addressing gender issues. Therefore, they will not invest in that. So in terms of this committee now, you then spread in terms of the terms of its oversight, not just on economic or financial risk. They now have to be looking at environmental risk, social risk, the governance risk, then a report to the board, and the ultimate person responsible now for this sustainability risk becomes also the chairman, which basically means that the chairman of the board now need to have that responsibility of setting out this structure, reporting mechanism, and also accountability mechanisms. So in a nutshell, this is just the oversight of what is expected of a sustainability committee, that it now looks into the broader risk rather than business and economic or financial risk of the company.
Thank you, Mr. Ndamba. For our audience, you can post your question on the chat box or you can raise your hand. I'll be able to pick up your questions and ensure that the guests are able to actually respond to some of them. I'll quick some of the questions that I've got that were posed during registration. There's one question that says, how do you maintain sustainability in the boardroom in a resource-constrained and VUCA environment?
Okay, just to come to that, because I talked about it, that you need an investment on your sustainability, but as a matter of policy, you need a policy that will help you guide in terms of how we are going to manage sustainability. Sustainability also has benefits. In actual fact, there's a huge cost of not doing it. And this is where you find out, try and contextualize in the corporate world in Zimbabwe, why a lot of the markets or some of the companies are actually riding on shaky grounds at the moment. A typical example is we had the retail sector. Because sustainability was not part and parcel of this sector, we lost it to second-hand stuff. We lost it even to externals who brought in cheap goods. And these are the costs that companies had to pay. Then you go even for some of the existing large companies, because sustainability is not part and parcel of their board practice, their operational practices. It's very easy to lose a market within a matter of hours in Zimbabwe because of lack of sustainability practice. Because if you look at some of the international brands, this is where they thrive on. This is where they compete on. This is where they build their competitive advantage. That's why I was saying this is one of the greatest economic opportunities of our times. So you can start small, then continue to improve as you go on. So that for me would be one way of maintaining it. Start off with even just your policy, then start reshaping, doing training, even one for the board, so that they've got the right understanding. Then your executives, so that they've got the right understanding. Then you move on to your operations as well, such that when they practice, they are actually practicing from an informed position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ndamba. Any questions from the audience? I'm not seeing any hands. Therefore, I will continue with the questions that we collected during registration. One question that is here, Mr. Juru, the issue of succession planning, how does it contribute towards sustainability of a board? Mr. Juru, are you still there? Mr. Ndamba, you can take over. I can see you are very attentive.
Okay. No, thank you so much. The issue of succession planning is a sustainability issue. How sustainable is the board? As I concluded my presentation, I also talked about the history that we are leaving for the next generation. So we are not here to stay. And one of the things is that we have to understand that corporate boards are different from the UN Security Council, where you have permanent seats. You must know that even when you get appointed, at some point you must be able to say, you know what, I don't think I'm not able to contribute effectively. It's now time to actually pass on to someone else who bring in fresh ideas. So if you look at even the standards that I talked about, which is the GRI standard, they also talked about governance, even the succession system. And one of the key things that we also look at is the terms of the board. For how long have people been in the board, and what are the term limits, so that it doesn't become an ongoing process. Talking from experience, myself, I have represented Africa in the Global Reporting Initiative, and no matter how good I would, and my term came to an end and there were no negotiations, I had to leave. So these are things that need to be incorporated in our board, so that we do not have people who say, you know what, I'm available for re-election. You must be, have say, if it's 5-year limit or a 6-year limit, it's a 6-year limit. The moment you get to that point, you need to go away for a cooling period, a year or 2 years or 3 years. Other companies in developed countries, they say you need to go away for the minimum first term. your term could be a year, so you need to be away for a year, no negotiation. So that provides an effective succession plan that needs to be documented and be adopted as a practice, rather than having this ongoing where people doesn't work.
Thank you, and I think most board members in Zimbabwe will understand this. I'm available for next board sitting. I think we are running out of time, but I'm going to give you the last question that I've got, unless if anyone of the attendances have got a burning issue that needs to be responded to. It's about pushing sustainability reporting to non-listed companies. What do you think we should do to make sure that the companies that are not on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange are also pushing such reporting?
No, thank you so much. I'll just start by a research that was done by Oxford Business School. One of the things that they found was that entities that were incorporating sustainability tended to perform financially better, and the countries that had more companies incorporating sustainability, they were performing much better economically, and they were much more of a target for foreign direct investment. So bringing that into Africa, I did find countries like South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria that were also incorporating this, and these were the largest takers of foreign direct investment in Africa. You look at also Mauritius, Rwanda, in which these are now filtering as practices. So coming now to the question, we have a tricky situation now for non-listed companies. If you register under the New Companies and Other Business Entities Act, which you are required to, then you go to that section 220, which requires you to comply with ZIM code. And you go into ZIM code, section 5 requires you to produce a sustainability report. It definitely means the non-listed companies are taken care of as long as they say they are complying with the New Companies and Other Business Entities Act. But it doesn't have to be a compliance issue. It's a competitive advantage, it's a business strategy, it's a business model. If you look at small countries like Singapore, which are the most competitive and sustainable economies, sustainability is across every business. So it doesn't have to be by law. I think companies that are actually not doing it are actually losing out, because right now the new crop of investors, we call them impact investors. They are targeting companies where sustainability is a practice. Then we have got a group that controls over $68 trillion under the United Nations Principles on Responsible Investing. They don't invest in companies where sustainability is not a requirement. And the good part is that we've got one of our own large pension fund, which is also a signatory to that is Old Mutual. And under their responsible business policy, this is what they're expected to do in any company. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ndamba. I think I'm only left to thank the audience and the participants for coming on board. I think at some point we reached about 40 participants, and I'd like to thank you for coming to be part of the boardroom today. And I would also like to thank our guests, Mr. Juru and Mr. Ndamba, for this educational information that you have disseminated to our members. Thank you to the counselors of the Institute of Directors. Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time. I look forward to the future discussions, which I believe we should be able to do something next week. At this juncture, thank you and have a good day.